was that first question, which in the morning I asked folks to share in the chat. And I've got some actually decent notes from this morning to bring up some other examples. Was really starting off with the different roles in your community. So I put in Moodle kind of some definitions of different leadership roles, but wanted to start with, like, within your communities or more than one, what role do you have, whether it's a official designated, I have a title kind of role, or even say one that is not as well defined or more nebulous.
I'll yield to my colleague.
I'm like, oh, is that me?
Yes.
Yep, you're it. Although I'll share too, so we get the conversation.
Yeah. I was like, I'm like peer.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. In like official role of obviously like my work community, but also like the Vista community, it is like Vista leader, but also like a member of that, a member of actual like Square Center and the Brown community, which still is like definitely feels disconnected because it's all virtual and we're not on campus. And even though I'm familiar with it and it's, you know, just the city as well, it's one of the communities. And then there's where I'm living, which is like Cranston, which is a different city. I'm obviously a resident and just community member in that regard. Kind of like, I don't know, I'm like, oh, I like using all the public things like libraries and stuff like that, but just kind of like a single individual community resident. And I think that is probably the best I can think of for now.
Or were there ones that you like feel like you belonged to before that you don't necessarily reside in or are active in, but you played a large role in?
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking about that towards the end, so I'm glad you brought that up. Like the music community, maybe in a sense, and I'm trying to see what that looks like for like adults who aren't necessarily in ensembles or anything, but I would definitely say like a member of like the arts and like appreciating either by musical theater or plays and performances that are going essentially when they come back to being live and in person in the community. And then also, I guess part of like either as a Cranston resident and also by like the Brown community, just environmental groups. So there's a few different ones, and like I get different newsletters and things like that. So I guess like an environmental justice community. I'm blanking on the exact word.
Yeah, but you have like, say, a defined role or kind of
by the end of class.
Your own like self-appointed kind of leadership role, or?
Yeah, I would say because there is like an official group that I'm a member of, but like for now I'm just a member. Although in the Delaware group, which is like the climate reality thing, I don't remember if I've talked about it in this class or another class, but in Delaware I was like a secretary in that club, so I'm a member in the club now. And as I'm kind of figuring out like what my workload and school workload and just like outside obligations are going to be, potentially there's always room to take on like an official leadership kind of role, but then the unofficial, like maybe leading by example or just by being a member, like having other people like leading that way. So yeah.
Sure. Very cool. Rashid.
Sure. Actually, I got a visual.
Okay, great.
So this is not really complete,
Yeah.
but it's kind of a start.
You had to do it for 601?
No,
Oh, okay.
I had to do this to try to talk to my secretary for my board.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I kind of learned Padlet. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't know if I learned it for 601, but I learned it for the Our Future Now experimental course.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so I would say I have this nonprofit Namaz, but then I'm involved with BSA. So with BSA, I've got a number of hats. So I have one. Gee whiz, do I have that? So I need to add this. I'm involved at the council level. I'm involved at also the national level. See, this is where I need to start because he's asking me, what is all your relationships? And
Oh, yeah.
that's why I have to start mapping out to him. So I have a hat where I'm at my local council. I wear the hat of the, well, if I just actually brought up my signature block, that would probably, I'm the hat of, I'm a vice president for religious relationships.
Hmm.
At my council, I wear the hat of the executive director for my nonprofit. I'm on the national committee for the Messengers of Peace.
Okay.
I'm also the affinity chair for the Association for Muslim Eagle Scouts, which is with the National Eagle Scout Association. So that's also
Right.
national level. Then within my, then if I brought it down, I'm also how so those are like, what would you call, what was that word? Those are designated roles, right?
Hmm.
But I have now, I've stepped back. Oh no, I've also designated role as the institutional head of 3 units in Doha, Qatar, because we charter them.
Right.
But then if I step back, I am now, I was a founding member of units in the National Capital Area Council. So I still have quite the influence there. So you can say that I'm still, what's it, the word, implied leader there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Usually I still kind of have to give the blessing on many things or
Yeah.
influence. Just today, for an example, my son was having a problem with his Eagle Scout project over some disputed territory. He sent the email to the mayor of the city, of the town. The mayor, he didn't mention my name at all. 20 minutes after he sent the email, I got a phone call straight from the mayor. So she goes, this must be Rashid's son.
Yeah.
So that goes to show you the kind of influence and relationship that I have, that
Hmm.
she immediately put two and two together and she goes, oh, this is Rashid's son. And that's because she's been over to my house before. She's eaten at my house, so she knows me. So that they're,
But it also explains, I think, some things about the dynamics of the community too, and some of the closeness.
yep, it helps when you put her sign out on the yard.
Hmm.
And when she called, I answered, hi, Sheila, because her name was on my phone. So I knew who was calling me when she called.
Nice.
And then I walked into my son's room. I said, say hello to Madam Mayor. And he's like, I just
Like,
emailed her. I'm like, mm-hmm. So, so anyways, he's like, I'm going to get this problem solved. And I'm like, and I talked to him about how a well-constructed email, because we spent like 2 hours constructing the email. And I said, look, she only took 30 seconds, talking to me, and she already had, where to go. I said, that's because we spent all that time. And now she can forward that email and there's little
right.
discussion. So the mentorship and so forth. So I think that's the other thing, is the mentorship that's there. And then there's an issue in the city, in the county, about school holidays related to religion. And so
Hmm.
I'm being asked, hey, can you tap into your network and so forth. So I think those are the kinds of things. And I got a phone call the other day. I just got a phone call yesterday from Mississippi, a scout executive in Mississippi, to help out in developing scouting community there. from the Scout executive there. He says, hey, Rashid, I met you one time a couple years ago. I still had your card. I'm reaching out to you. Things like this. So I think that's what I'm trying to talk about is that kind of stuff that happens. I get those kind of reach outs. So that's where I'm at. And then within my work, I just
Right.
so I have that on the volunteer side, and then with my work, I was asked to help join the cloud practice. So professionally and technically, I'm an emerging leader. So using the terminology you have there, so there's an emerging leadership happening there. And I just mentioned to you that I'll be interviewing for a new position.
Yeah. So that'll change the dynamic too.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, a lot of things happening from a leadership perspective going on. Yeah.
Very cool. So yeah, we had interesting conversations this morning around the ability to have for example, a designated leadership role, and how that sometimes happens out of a variety of things. What we called some things like clout, and not like always in a positive and not always in a negative way either. So it has, benefits and drawbacks as well. We were talking about clout and how that made a difference in specifically designated roles, and who can get, in general, a designated role over someone else. I thought that was an interesting dynamic that kept coming up, is that makes a difference in some communities, not all of them.
Yeah, I kind of felt there's a position that I'm not designated a leader in one position, but I kind of felt like the person who is not as qualified as I am. But I think because of a relationship, he got the position. But for me, it doesn't bother me too much, to be honest with you, because sometimes I feel you could do a lot of leading from behind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, I often feel that when you are actually the point, you're going to get knocked by a lot of people, and that kind of is disruptive, right? You have to answer to a lot of reports, because I've been that frontline leader. And so it's actually, if you really want to get a lot of the work done, it's best to be behind the lines, behind the scenes, because you can let that guy who's out front get hit,
right?
Get the work done, and then you can report to that guy and say, hey, here's what's happening. So you can collect the kudos later on, and people will know what's happening, and you don't always have to be the guy. I think it was it Ronald Reagan who said, I think it was Ronald Reagan or whatever, he didn't need to be the guy who got the accolade as long as the work got done. I think it was
right. Well, it's funny though, it works the opposite too. Like if you're the one working in the background, not necessarily always taking orders, but trying to get the overall mission of something done, if it doesn't go well, who takes the fall? And it's that designated leader out front. So, I mean, like when we saw January 6th, who are the people that end up, quote, paying for things that did not work right? The chief of the Capitol Police. And who else? Let's see, the DC police
Sergeant
chief.
of Arms.
Yeah, the sergeant of arms too. And I think there were probably a couple more. So it can work both ways. So if, it sometimes is nice not to be that designated leader, just be able to do your job, do what you're tasked with. But as soon as something doesn't go right, they're the ones that they carry the risk, right? There's a risk inherent to being a designated leader.
That's exactly my point. That's why at this point I'm not I'm fine with not carrying that risk.
Right.
Especially during a transitional state that BSA is in at the moment. I'm fine in like, okay, right now there's a lot of things happening. I'd rather try to get the program changing and there's a lot to be done. I'm being asked to do a lot of things. I personally got a lot on my plate, so I'm happy that somebody else's head potentially could roll. I'm not happy, but
Right.
I'm finding not.
But they have the risk, and
Yeah,
they probably get compensated for that risk as well.
yeah. I mean, they'll get the kudos, and that's fine. But I know I will. I mean, usually if you are in it for the right reasons, you'll get
Right.
the appropriate kudos.
So this was interesting this morning. We were talking about Peace Corps, Carissa, and I think this is probably very similar perspective for AmeriCorps too, and for Vistas. This kind of overwhelming, I guess, occurrences. The number of occurrences is more than normal for when designated leaders just suck. And I wanted to see what your perspective was, at least from AmeriCorps, because this was from a Peace Corps perspective, that designated leaders just were not a good fit, were not good leaders. And I wanted to know if that was true of a Vista perspective.
I did not think that was what you were going to say. I was thinking more along the lines of like, we're maybe more the type, or I'm also speaking for myself, but like the type of people that are doing a lot of the background work. So we are leaders, but we're not necessarily always getting the credit. But maybe that goes hand in hand because we're doing a lot of the work, and I guess a leader might not be as strong or something else. And then if we're successful, it shows well on them. And my two services and in my current one as well, like leader as in like my program manager and supervisor, like who I report to type of thing. Because I would say both of them it's been a good experience. My supervisor last year, like certain things I didn't like about her were just like she wasn't always timely and like kind of scattered all over the place, but like she like sang Vista's praises, and she gave us a lot of at first, also because it was like transitioning into that role and having so much independence and freedom, I was kind of like, is this okay? Like, am I supposed to be doing this? But like at the end of my service, she was always like, yeah, this is what she worked on, like totally let me own it essentially. So I felt very supported in that role. And in my role now, I kind of feel the same. And I think it's more of, and definitely even from like the other Vistas, within our cohort, most of the Vistas do like their supervisors. The challenges are more that if they're newer to the program, or like sometimes the turnover can kind of that's like happen quickly, I guess. But other than that, I think it's been okay, like I would say. But I have, in like the other jobs I had, I didn't feel that my supervisors were that strong, and that was kind of what led me to like look into other things. So yeah, I can definitely see that being a thing.
Yeah, I do wonder if the context, say, of AmeriCorps and Vista being domestic versus Peace Corps being international, if the context then makes a difference. Especially the reason why people would take on a leadership role in what they do in Peace Corps versus AmeriCorps, and how much different that is. And how much of a difference that does make.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go for it.
I don't know if either of you are more familiar with AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, but is that something that like their supervisor is also overseas with them, or it's okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were listening to some pretty shocking stories, not just today, but this has been a running theme where I'm like, I think there needs to be a Peace Corps support group in the university from all the folks that have gone through Peace Corps
Wow.
and have had, many have had positive experiences, but others, from an American perspective, has been damaging to the local community.
Wow. Yeah.
Because really, if you think about the Peace Corps program and the reason why it was even started was to provide first world support to developing countries. And save the day, Americans, we're going to go into third world countries and help people build schools and houses and toilets, and that I think has emerged into something else. And some of them even verged on saying like toxic leadership of some of the supervisors or some of the Peace Corps leaders, because of that skewed dynamic. The American coming in with a mission and doing it and deciding, as opposed to involving and organically choosing or organically setting priorities amongst the community members, as opposed to what they think is best, from their, again, American perspective. So I think it makes a difference. I've seen where I have seen a similar dynamic in the US is when AmeriCorps Vista program members from more urban settings get placed in rural communities. It's the only place I've seen it domestically where that dynamic shifts so much, where the AmeriCorps supervisor oversteps there a little.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I think it's also, again, like my two sites, although like different from each other, I think could be similar in the way that we're working with an organization that then has other organizations that are like helping. So, and I could even see if you're referring to strictly AmeriCorps or like the Vista position, because this is also like more behind the scenes and it's supposed to be, but with any of the direct service kind of roles, I could also see how that's like a fine line between what we're supposed to be doing or not, and even like what we're supposed to be doing now. It's like, okay, making sure these ideas or things that people are working on like is going to be beneficial to the community, and that they have the resources to do whatever we're planning and thinking about. So yeah, I could definitely see, and like especially being abroad and having like that kind of commitment for a little bit, so much of it is getting to even know your community, like the first 3 to 6 months of your service even.
Yep.
I could see that there definitely would be a difference between Peace Corps and AmeriCorps and how people would approach. Human beings naturally are ethnocentric, right? And so, especially Americans, and they are the most ethnocentric people on the face of this earth, right? We know this, right? We're Americans. We know our culture. It's the most ethnocentric culture, and that's usually the biggest complaint about Americans, right? So for those of us who are exposed to international cultures, that's probably my wife is from overseas, right? And I have, and just because of my faith, I've been exposed to so many people from other cultures and other backgrounds. And so I know this, and living in Hawaii.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hawaii was like beat the holiday,
Yeah.
I mean, the very, white soldiers, they'd be like wondering why they'd get beat up. And I'd be like, yeah, you go somewhere and you come with your belt buckle about this big and wearing a cowboy hat. And then you go walking into a part of Hawaii and you kind of with that face, like, what are you looking at? And of course, a Samoan who's about 3 times your size is going to beat the crap out of you. All you have, I says, I never had a problem because when they looked at me, I'd say, hey, what's up, brother? And then they just say, hey. And
Yeah.
but if you look back at them and say, what are you looking at? Like it's some kind of macho test. That's it. It's all over because
Right.
it's not a culture. It's not a culture, a war culture there or a culture of wars there. It's meant to. They're literally scoping you out to see because you're on their territory.
Right.
And so people don't realize, like the very first thing, just going back to today's deal with the mayor, I told my son about Southern hospitality, and the very first thing he said when he got off the phone, he goes, "Yeah, you were right
Now
about
you get
Southern
it.
hospitality," because Sheila is from the South. She's from Alabama, and so the minute she got off the phone, he was like, "You were so right about that." And I said, "Listen, there's a reason why I've been telling you when you send an email or someone sends an email to you or blah, 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 I'm trying to teach you how you talk to someone of a certain age or of a certain culture, of a certain background." I says, you don't talk to everybody like they're your best friend. You have to understand everybody's background.
Yep.
And then that's how you talk to them, not how you talk to your friend or not how you talk to, you talk to everybody how they need to be talked to. And he goes, okay, I'm getting it. And so you adapt to them. You don't make them adapt to you.
What's funny is this exact same thing came up this morning in talking about a couple different things, but more so from big picture, collectivist societies versus individualistic, which individualistic is like American to a T, to more collectivist societies that we see in how elders are respected, taken care of, part of a community for quite some time, as opposed to individualistic ones, like in a lot of Americans, where the older you get, the less kind of respect can be, not always, of course, but be paid. With the exception of, say, like urban versus rural. So a lot of us that have either lived in or currently live in or come from rural areas said that's still the norm because they had to be more collectivist in context, because there's like 500 people as opposed to 500,000 people, and you're reliant on the community, and therefore, someone who has more experience, has more clout, like we mentioned, commands, not necessarily because they ask it, but have either, in the eyes of other people, earned it or deserve that level of respect. What was it we were talking about? It was very respect of elders, and how somebody would never fathom doing some of the things that folks do in their community, in the society that they're living in, based off of those norms that come from collectivist versus individualistic. And I think of Southern hospitality as a key one. We just don't do certain things because that just isn't you. I think it was
when you want to talk bad about someone in Southern hospitality, you say, bless their heart.
Bless their heart. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was on a call with somebody the other day. I think I told you about this. It's like they mentioned how somebody was, yeah, he wasn't really an active listener. And basically they were saying is that guy was talking over everyone.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I think it was either Grace this morning or I think it was Grace. But in talking about her AmeriCorps work, she's like, no, I had to, maybe it wasn't Grace. I'm gonna mess up who it was. But talking about, like, to get some things done, it was, I'm gonna go take coffee and cookies to the 90-year-old down the street so that I can get some things done and taken care of. So like with same thing with some of the clients that I work with, you know, DPSF's the foundation's president that I work with, she's retired. She's in her 70s. She's a retired school teacher. And when I started doing work with them, it was, well, come over to my house for lunch and we'll talk about some stuff. Like, I don't want to say you got to play the game, but that is like the context, that is the game of, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to eat chicken salad on Triscuits and I'm going to have tea and sit down on somebody's lanai and we're going to talk about some stuff and get some things done. And that was the expectation. And I think that very much is not like, I don't know if it's only, I don't think it's only a generational thing, but it's a level of respect for making decisions and making progress, if that's the best way to put it. I'm not sure
Have you
if
seen the TV show on, I think it's on Hulu, was it Michael James? It's called Crew. It's set in a NASCAR setting.
no. I'll
Watch
have to look at that
It's
one.
literally this problem. You could use it for this class, by the way. So just to give you the plot in 30 seconds, the founder of the NASCAR team retires, hands over the reins to the daughter. She's a Stanford graduate, comes in, and she makes all these changes, butts heads against Michael. Who's it? The guy was on Kevin James.
Hmm.
And starts butting heads, and he's saying, no, you don't want to do this, that's not the way how you do it. And she goes, no, this is how. Anyways, that is the dynamics of the show. It was just basically how you're talking about chicken salad and Triscuits. He was saying, this is how you got to do it. She's like, no, this is not how you do it. She wants to do business the new way. He's saying, no, this is the way you want to do business. But in the end, I don't want to give away the plot, but in the end, they kind of have
they figure it out.
I would, using the terminology of the Southern hospitality, they have a come to Jesus kind of talk, right? And they learn how to reconcile the two styles. She had good intentions, but his style worked for that kind of setting per se. But
And was the acceptable way to lead.
yeah, I mean his style was definitely a good style. She had good intentions. She had some good points. And when he learned and understood what she was going, and then when she learned how he was doing business, things became more copacetic. But that was the dynamics of the show and the comedy of the whole thing. But it is definitely a commentary on leadership styles, by the way. That's why I bring it up. It's relevant to the course, and kind of a study on things. But I think that's basically to your point about generational styles and approaches and things like that, and how someone who was academic in their approach and this is how you do things. I'm like, he's like, nope, that's not how you do things.
So just in going back to kind of your all's communities and roles and looking at, say, implied versus emergent versus designated roles, it seemed, well, both of you have very implied roles in addition to, say, designated or emergent. But like you mentioned, even though for Carissa, even though there's an official group and you don't have a designated leadership role, are folks coming to you as more of an implied leader because of expertise or having worked in certain fields or even charisma or information that you may possess, even if it's their perception?
I feel like not totally in the role, like the unspoken roles now. Maybe a little bit when I was a member of the club in Delaware, just because we're also meeting more in person and we're able to talk more. Whereas in the roles now, I feel like also part of like my, how I was introduced to the club was like kind of gave the background and how I found out about the club. But it's not like we've had very extensive conversations about like, hey, I'm really good at this, or like, and like I'm still also learning that. So I would say like definitely like as this leader, even though it's clear that's my role, I am feel like I'm upholding that pretty well. But like in the other groups, I'm kind of just like not like hanging out, but it just feels like kind of floating there for now. If that makes sense and answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So then for both of you, do you feel like one type of those leadership roles, so like implied leader being one who doesn't have a title, people defer to, versus emergent, you just kind of come out of the discussion as the leader, versus designated, very much title, very much either elected, appointed, selected for a role. Do you all feel like you prefer one over the other? Or one is, in your perspective, maybe better than another?
I really prefer the implied. Yeah.
You as well, Carissa?
I think I kind of do too. Yeah, or if anything like emergent, because again, it will depend on the situation. But like I don't, and I think maybe because of it being implied, it like feels emergent. But I'm just thinking like if I were like, so in my role last year when there would be like kind of staff meetings and discussions or things that were going on, it was good because my feedback was also valued, but it was like also different perspectives from some of the other of like my colleagues. So whenever I suggested something that they were like, okay, this could work, but like then I would kind of like either take the role for it or they defer back to me at various points. So I feel like I do like that, and how we were talking about earlier. Sometimes the designated leaders, like if there's any conflicts, blah, blah, anything like that, like it does go back to me. So I feel like almost if we were like, oh, still the same cohort, but like we were meeting regularly and I just kind of acted as like the implied leader without being that. That's what I kind of enjoy and like I'm comfortable with.
I'll tell you why I like the implied leader role. For me, it reflects, for me, it's a 360 feedback. It tells me that I have demonstrated leadership.
There's a level of respect based off of action.
Yeah, because there's a difference between leadership and being a leader. So when you are the implied leader, it means you've demonstrated leadership and people have put you into that role without being the lead, without being designated the leader. And that's because they have seen leadership in your style. It's happened to me in that one role that I am now. Because of my leadership, I was the implied leader, and finally they just formalized it and made me the designated leader. And it's happened in many cases. In fact, the fact that I got the phone call just the other day from the Scout executive in Mississippi, and from many other people, it continues to happen again and again. Even when I tell people I'm not this, I'm not that, this is the other person, they're like, yeah, but that person doesn't respond and that person doesn't respond. I'm like, okay, I'll help you. So I try to defer because that person is the designated leader, but because of their ineffectiveness, I become the leader because it's 3 words I learned in the Army: make it happen. And that's really what leadership is all about. It's not about the title. It's about, do you make it happen? Do you assume responsibility? Are you accountable? And that does not require a title.
Right. Well, there's a couple things with that. One that was brought up this morning was the relationship that people have with, say, a implied or emergent leader, and how it's different with a designated leader is because with most designated leaders, you have a forced relationship. If they are the chair, if they are the president, they are this, they are that, they serve in that role, and there's a there are many levels of expectations, right? We expect that they are shown, some level of respect, and that with this role or title that they have, we assume sometimes that they have this level of expertise or this level of ability. And sometimes that's not the case. Like we were talking about fake it till you make it this morning. And some leaders do, and they do really well with that. And then others, it does not go so well. So yeah, the designated leader taking being more of a forced relationship that doesn't feel organic isn't a bad thing. Like there's not like one that's better than another. It just has a different dynamic. The other this morning, you mentioned responsibility, and I think stemming from that conversation, you find you find implied leaders take on much more of a personal role of responsibility that gets them to be recognized as an implied leader. So we were kind of identifying pros and cons to each kind, and is there something about, even though we like to work with implied leaders because, like we've talked about, there's a demonstration of leadership rather than a title and it being empty. So while we like to say we like to work with implied leaders, sometimes it feels weird to call ourselves an implied leader because that is dependent upon somebody treating us like an implied leader. You don't earn it, or you don't, in so many ways, some ways you don't earn it per se, or you aren't given it. You show and then receive. And so some people have a harder time saying, even if they're very self-aware, yeah, maybe it's kind of like self-deprecating, right? No, I'm not a implied leader with this, just because these people reach out to me, or this happens, or I did this, I'm not an implied leader. Where others maybe like, absolutely don't want a title, don't care, I'm going to do this work regardless, because I want to take on the responsibility. What I find kind of, and then I'll kind of allow us to wrap up here a little bit, is, because we didn't talk about this morning, and maybe it's a different perspective, designated leadership in combination with being a founder. And when a founder is no longer the designated leader and somebody takes on that designated leader role, that still means that they're the founder, and they take on more of, say, an implied role because they are the person with the expertise. They are the person that has done this before. How does that like affect the dynamic? And could that also be toxic?
Ah, you're speaking my language. That's the role I've been in.
That's the role I'm in now. So
Yeah.
being the designated leader after the designated leader / founder.
So I followed the EDGE method: explain, demonstrate, guide, and then enable. So it's the enabling phase, right, which follows the formation of team dynamics, right, where you go for those stages of where you're forming,
Storming, norming.
norming, and then performing. But when you change the dynamics of the team because you step down, you have to realize that there's going to be that reforming, which is the fifth stage, and then they're going to go back through it, and you have to step back and somehow facilitate things, make sure that the vision is still there, but at this point you're enabling. I'm doing that with my venturing crew, trying to make sure that things are still staying on path, that the crew is still happening, because I was the founding chartered organization representative. I helped found it. I understand it. I understand the program the best. At least I think I do. I have to come from that perspective. Maybe they know better now. But I am getting information fed from all these corners. The first person to get a Summit Award, which is the highest award of venturing, is now finally there. Aha, they did it not under my watch, they did it under somebody else's watch. It took some time. The boy started when I was there, but he finally got there. So point being is what I'm trying to get at is I feel that the mentoring, we finally got to that stage. And for me personally, I claim the victory of that the mentoring of the people allowed for this to happen, right? And the unit stayed afloat after I left. To me, so that's to me the victory. It stayed alive without me, and that's the success, and that's the enabling. And I think that's where I'm talking about, like as a founder of the unit, the best leader is one who realizes that the day you assume leadership is the day you start looking for your successor.
Mm-hmm. We have 4 minutes left. Any kind of final thoughts and or questions? I did want to mention too also that the lab #1, like some folks were trying to figure out where they submit it, that is now like taken care of. It is open to where if you go into week 5 when it's due, there's a little assignment button that you click on, so there shouldn't be any further issues about trying to submit it. And let's see what else. Any questions about the lab that you might have?
No questions. I'm got my appointment with my guy.
Awesome, possum.
I'm excited.
Any questions from you, Carissa, on anything, or stuck on anything? Everything's flying all right?
No, yeah, not right now, no questions. But.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, it's been an interesting conversation, and glad I could also bring in some things from this morning that it's uncanny how some of the perspectives are and key words that you all have mentioned are exactly what was brought up this morning. I think everybody has a very similar experience, even when context is very different. So, so that was very, very informative. So,
Well,
any other?
I'm glad I didn't take the option because it would have just been 2 of you.
Yeah, right. And I think, yeah, Ivy moved to the morning, and then Austin, not sure, have to check in on him. So very different dynamic and interesting conversation regardless. So I appreciate the good dialogue and the sharing. So even if it's 2 or it's 20, doesn't matter. So, all right, well, I'll leave it to you all to get back to the real world, and I will see you back here next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, have a good week.
Thanks, you too.